The kitchen in the Hayes Barton historic home was a monument to someone else's taste. Gleaming, commercial-grade stainless steel, a 6-burner wolf range that could service a small army, and a slab of Carrara marble for an island so vast and cold it felt like an operating table. For Evelyn Harrington, it was both a sanctuary and a gilded cage. Tonight it was a pressure cooker. Her hands, usually steady, felt the tremor of a looming deadline. On the pristine marble sat the components of her art, tiny, hand-carved cups of English cucumber ready for a smoked salmon mousse, crostini sliced to a perfect 1/4-inch thickness, waiting for a dollop of fig jam and a whisper-thin slice of prosciutto, wild mushrooms sautéed with shallots and thyme, their earthy aroma filling the sterile air, destined for delicate, house-made vol au vent pastry shells. This was not cooking. It was architecture on a miniature scale. Each of the 300 appetizers for the governor's charity gala had to be a perfect, self-contained bite of bliss. It was the most important night of her husband's career, and by extension, hers. She had once dreamed of her own bistro, a cozy little place with mismatched chairs and a menu that changed daily. But that dream had been carefully packed away, like fine china, when she married Blake. The sound of expensive leather shoes on the polished oak floor announced his arrival. State Senator Blake Harrington entered the kitchen, not as a husband, but as an inspector general. He loosened the knot of his silk tie, his eyes scanning the space not for his wife, but for imperfections. His gaze swept over her meticulous work without a flicker of interest. "Is everything on schedule, Evelyn?" he asked, his voice the smooth, practiced baritone that had charmed half of North Carolina. He walked over to the Sub-Zero refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of sparkling water, his reflection in the steel door momentarily catching his attention. He straightened his tie. "Seth Adler is worried about the traffic downtown. We can't be late." Evelyn didn't look up from piping the creamy salmon mousse into its cucumber vessel. "Everything is under control, Blake. The catering assistants will be here in an hour to transport everything. I'll be ready." "Good," he said, taking a sip of water. "Just remember, the food is just lubrication. It keeps the donors happy while they're opening their checkbooks. The main event is the speech." He set the bottle down on the counter with a soft clink. "And you, of course. You're the other main event." He finally looked at her, but his eyes weren't seeing the artist at work. They were assessing the asset. "That blue dress we picked out will be perfect. Just smile, look supportive. You know the drill." He said it with a casual air, as if he were giving instructions to a staffer. The unspoken addendum hung in the air between them. "Don't talk about your little hobby. Don't be anything other than the charming, silent wife." A familiar, dull ache settled in her chest. She had given up her culinary school ambitions, her dreams of a life seasoned with her own passions, to help him achieve his. She had hosted countless dinners, charmed skeptical party chairs, and stood silently by his side at 1,000 podiums. In return, he saw her greatest talent as a party trick, a useful tool for his advancement. "I know the drill," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. He didn't seem to notice. "Excellent," he said, already turning to leave. "I'll be in the study going over my notes." As he walked away, Evelyn picked up a single perfect chive and placed it on a finished canapé like a final defiant brushstroke. It was her signature, even if no one knew to look for it. The day of the gala dawned gray and drizzly over Raleigh, but inside the Harrington residence in Hayes Barton, Evelyn's world was a whirlwind of controlled, colorful chaos. This was her true element, the hours before the performance, where every second and every movement mattered. The kitchen, once a cold showroom, was now a vibrant living organism, and she was its heart, pumping life into every corner. Her mise en place, prepared over the last 2 days, was a testament to her discipline. Tiny bowls held perfectly minced shallots, glistening herbs, and jewel-like capers. Her hands moved with a fluid economy that was mesmerizing to watch. One moment she was searing scallops until they wore a golden brown crust, their sweet, oceanic scent mingling with the nutty aroma of brown butter. The next, she was carefully folding goat cheese and honey into a light-as-air pastry, her touch firm but gentle. It was a symphony of process, a dance she had perfected over 20 years of devotion to her craft. The sizzle of the pan was her percussion, the rhythmic chop of her knife a steady beat, the gentle hum of the convection oven a sustained chord. Her two hired assistants arrived, young culinary students whose eyes widened at the sight of the professional-grade setup. They worked with a quiet reverence, following Evelyn's calm, clear instructions for plating and packing. She was a natural leader in this domain, patient and precise, explaining the importance of keeping the hot appetizers separate from the cold, how to arrange them on the serving platters for maximum visual appeal. "We eat with our eyes first," she told them with a soft smile, a phrase she'd learned from her grandmother, the woman who had first put a whisk in her hand. For these few hours, she wasn't Senator Harrington's wife. She was Chef Harrington, and the respect in the young assistant's eyes was more intoxicating than any political victory. Just as they were loading the final climate-controlled containers, Blake descended from his office upstairs, already clad in his impeccably tailored tuxedo. He exuded an aura of nervous energy and raw ambition. He checked his watch, a gold Patek Philippe that had been a gift from a real estate developer. "Evelyn, it's getting late. Seth is on his way. You need to get ready." He gestured impatiently at her apron, which bore a light dusting of flour and a small smudge of chocolate. "You can't go looking like that." He glanced at the dozens of meticulously arranged platters, his expression unreadable. "Is all this necessary? It seems excessive." The word struck her like a slap. Excessive. He saw her passion, her art, her 14-hour day as an indulgence. "The governor will be there, Blake," she replied, her voice tight. "The donors are expecting a certain standard." "Right, the donors," he said, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. He walked over to her, lowering his voice. "Look, your job tonight is simple. Stand by me, smile, and let me handle the rest. Don't get cornered by someone asking you for a recipe. It's unprofessional. Tonight is about power, not puff pastry." He gave her a perfunctory peck on the cheek, his mind already 1,000 miles away in the grand ballroom. "Now please, go get changed. The car will be here in 20. He strode out of the kitchen, leaving a void where his presence had been. Evelyn stood motionless for a moment, the frantic energy of the morning draining away, replaced by a profound sense of emptiness. She looked at her hands, the hands that had just created hundreds of tiny masterpieces. To him, they were just the hands that were supposed to applaud. The grand ballroom of the Carolina Hotel was a dazzling spectacle of old Southern money and new political power. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of guests in black tie attire. The air hummed with the sound of clinking glasses, discreet laughter, and the relentless buzz of networking. For Blake, this was a feeding frenzy. For Evelyn, it felt like drowning. She stood beside him, the midnight blue silk of her gown feeling like a costume. Her smile, which she had practiced in the mirror, felt stiff and foreign on her face. Blake was a master of this environment, moving through the crowd with the fluid grace of a shark. He'd clasp a shoulder here, whisper a strategic compliment there, his laughter booming at a donor's mediocre joke. Evelyn was the silent, elegant anchor to his ship of ambition. She nodded, she smiled. She was a beautiful, voiceless echo of his charm. The appetizers began to circulate, carried on silver platters by uniformed waiters. Evelyn watched them go, a knot of professional anxiety tightening in her stomach. This was the moment of truth. She saw a state representative's wife pop a fig and prosciutto crostini into her mouth, her eyes widening slightly in pleasure. A small victory. But then her eyes fell upon a man standing alone near a marble pillar, away from the schmoozing clusters. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a shock of silver hair and a face that seemed carved from granite. He was dressed in a simple, perfectly cut tuxedo that made everyone else's look like a rental. He held one of her wild mushroom and truffle vol au vents, not eating it, but examining it. He brought it close to his nose, inhaling its aroma. He turned it over, studying the delicate, flaky pastry. Finally, he took a small, deliberate bite. Evelyn held her breath. The man's face remained impassive, his eyes analytical, critical. He chewed slowly, his gaze distant, as if he were deconstructing the flavors on his palate. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He simply finished the bite, placed the remainder of the pastry back on his napkin, and gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head before turning away. The knot in Evelyn's stomach turned to ice. He hated it. Of all the people in this room, she had caught the eye of the one person who was a true connoisseur, and she had failed his test. Blake, noticing her distraction, leaned in. "What is it?" he whispered, his smile never faltering for the crowd. "Nothing," she murmured, forcing her own smile back into place. "Just admiring the flowers." But her eyes kept drifting back to the stern-faced man, who was now speaking to the hotel's event manager, gesturing subtly in the direction of the kitchens. Her heart sank. She imagined him complaining about the food, the amateurish catering, the embarrassment. The humiliation was a private, bitter pill she was forced to swallow in a room full of performative joy. The clinking of a spoon against a crystal glass silenced the ballroom. The moment had arrived. Seth Adler, Blake's perpetually tense campaign manager, was at the podium, delivering a glowing introduction. "A man of integrity, a man of vision, a man for the future of North Carolina. It is my honor to introduce State Senator Blake Harrington." The room erupted in thunderous applause. Blake strode to the stage, bathing in the adoration, waving to the crowd with a confident, easy grace. Evelyn, seated at a front-and-center table, clapped along with everyone else, her hands feeling disconnected from her body. Her role was simple: gaze up at him with unwavering pride. Blake began his speech, and he was magnificent. His voice resonated with passion as he spoke of jobs, of family, of community, of a shared destiny. He was weaving a spell, and the entire room was captivated. He had them right where he wanted them. And then, he decided to go for the personal touch, the relatable moment. He paused, a folksy smile spreading across his handsome face. He gestured directly toward Evelyn. "You know," he said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone, "people ask me how I manage it all. The long hours, the travel, the constant pressure. And I tell them I couldn't do it without my better half." He paused for effect as a soft awe rippled through the audience. Evelyn's practiced smile felt brittle. "My wife Evelyn here is a wonderful woman," he continued, his smile widening into a grin. He was about to deliver the punchline. "As long as she stays in the kitchen where she belongs?" A wave of laughter, mostly from the men, rolled through the ballroom. Blake held up a hand, playing to the crowd. No, I'm kidding. Mostly. But really," he leaned into the microphone, his voice booming, "it's a good thing she's pretty because that's her main contribution." The laughter this time was a deafening roar. It crashed over Evelyn in a tidal wave of shame. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, some pitying, most amused. A camera flashed, searing the moment into her memory. She looked at Blake, who was beaming, looking at her as if he'd just handed her the world's most charming compliment. He expected her to laugh along, to be a good sport, but she couldn't. The blood had drained from her face, and the room began to tilt. The laughter was a physical force, pressing down on her, suffocating her. With a grace she didn't know she possessed, she pushed her chair back, stood, and walked away from the table. She didn't run. She moved with a numb, deliberate slowness, her head held high, as she slipped through a side door and out onto a deserted balcony, the sound of her husband's triumph and her own public execution echoing behind her. The cool night air was a balm on Evelyn's burning cheeks. She gripped the cold stone of the balcony railing, her knuckles white, and stared out at the glittering lights of the Raleigh skyline. The echo of that roaring laughter was still ringing in her ears, a cruel chorus that mocked every sacrifice she had ever made. A single hot tear traced a path down her cheek, a betrayal of the composure she was desperately trying to maintain. She was so lost in her misery that she didn't hear the door open and close behind her. The fennel and citrus-cured trout on pumpernickel, with a dill creme fraiche and a single salmon roe. The voice was deep, calm, and utterly unexpected. Evelyn startled, quickly wiping her tear away as she turned. It was him. The stern-faced man from the ballroom. He stood a respectful distance away, his hands in his pockets, his expression no longer critical but intensely serious. "That was yours, wasn't it?" Evelyn could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. She expected pity, or perhaps an awkward pleasantry before he retreated back to the party. Instead, he took a step closer. "My name is Oliver Keene." The name registered with a jolt. Oliver Keene, the notoriously ruthless food critic for the National Herald, a man whose reviews could build a chef's career or demolish a restaurant overnight. The ice in her stomach returned. "I know who you are, Mr. Keene," she managed to say. "I saw you. I assumed you didn't care for the vol au vent." A flicker of something, was it amusement, crossed his face. "On the contrary, Mrs. Harrington. I was deconstructing it. The pastry was laminated perfectly, 17 layers if I'm not mistaken. Light, buttery, but with enough structural integrity to hold the filling without becoming soggy. The duxelles were finely minced, not pulverized, and seasoned with just enough time to complement the truffle without overpowering it. It was, in a word, breathtaking." Evelyn stared at him, speechless. He had seen it. He had seen the technique, the intention, the art. He saw her. "I was not an official guest tonight," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "The governor's office asked me to do a quiet, unofficial review of the hotel's catering for future events. I was prepared for an evening of rubber chicken and bland platitudes." He gestured back toward the ballroom, from which the sound of applause was now filtering. "It seems I got the platitudes, but the food? The food was the work of an artist, of a professional who is being tragically wasted." His eyes were kind, but held a core of steel. "What your husband did in there was an act of profound ignorance. He is a fool, Mrs. Harrington. A fool who doesn't realize he is living with a genius." For the first time all night, Evelyn felt something other than shame. It was a fragile, unfamiliar spark, flickering to life in the hollow cavern of her chest. It was the feeling of being seen, flickering to life, and the tears that welled in her eyes now were not of humiliation, but of a validation so profound it felt like coming home. The spark of validation Oliver Keene had ignited on the balcony began to warm the frozen parts of Evelyn's soul. She looked at this stranger who understood her better in 5 minutes than her husband had in 15 years. "A genius?" she whispered, the word sounding absurd and wonderful at the same time. I just cook." "No," Oliver said, his voice firm. "Mona Lisa isn't just paint. A Mozart symphony isn't just notes. You have a gift, Mrs. Harrington, a rare and marketable talent, and a story." He paused, his sharp eyes assessing her, seeing not a broken woman on a balcony, but a protagonist at a turning point. "And a story, in the restaurant business, is worth its weight in gold." He leaned against the railing beside her, no longer a critic, but a strategist. "Let me be blunt. My review of this gala is going to be unkind, but not to you. To him," he jutted his chin toward the ballroom, "and to this city's palate. But I want to do more than just write about it. I want to be a part of the next chapter." Evelyn looked at him, confused. "The next chapter?" "I don't just write about food, Mrs. Harrington. I invest in it. I find talent and I build empires around it." He spoke with the quiet confidence of a man who had done it many times before. "I want to be your business partner. I will provide the seed money, every last dollar. I will leverage my connections to secure a location. I'm thinking the warehouse district, prime real estate. We'll get the best suppliers, the best staff. All I need from you is your talent, your name, and your fire." He saw the hesitation and doubt cloud her features. "Don't you see? You aren't just a chef. You're the chef they tried to silence, the artist he tried to lock in the kitchen. People won't just come for the food. They'll come to champion you. They'll come to be a part of your success." The vision he painted was so vivid, so audacious, that it stole her breath. A restaurant, her own restaurant. The dream she had buried so deep she'd almost forgotten its shape. Her mind, foggy with years of self-suppression, suddenly began to clear. She saw a menu, not of canapés, but of entrees. She saw a dining room, not cold and sterile, but warm and inviting. She saw her name, not as an appendage to his, but over the door. A lifetime of being told she was secondary, a supporting character, melted away under the heat of his belief in her. The fear was still there, a cold knot of anxiety, but for the first time, it was dwarfed by a thrilling, terrifying hope. She straightened up, her spine stiffening with a resolve she hadn't felt in years. She looked Oliver Keene directly in the eye. "I need to think about it," she said, her voice steady, but the decision was already made. She extended her hand. "Thank you, Mr. Keene." He took it, his grip firm and reassuring. It wasn't a handshake of sympathy, it was the seal on a new alliance. A declaration of independence. Evelyn drove home in a daze, the opulent ballroom and the cold balcony feeling like scenes from another woman's life. The deal with Oliver Keene felt both terrifying and inevitable, a life raft thrown to her in the middle of an ocean. She walked into the Hayes Barton house to find it silent. Blake wasn't home yet, likely still basking in the glow of his triumph, accepting congratulations at an after-party. She went upstairs, not to their master's suite, but to the guest room. Methodically, she pulled a suitcase from the closet and began to pack. Not everything, just the essentials. Her well-worn cookbooks, the set of French knives her grandmother had given her, the simple, comfortable clothes she wore when she wasn't on display. She was packing away Evelyn, the person, and leaving behind Mrs. Harrington, the construct. She was folding a sweater when she heard his key in the lock, followed by his confident footsteps in the foyer. "Evelyn!" he called out. "Where are you? We need to celebrate!" "Evelyn, Seth thinks we raised over $1 million tonight." He sounded euphoric, high on his own success. He came up the stairs and stopped dead in the doorway of the guest room, his smile faltering as he took in the scene. The open suitcase, her determined expression. "What's this?" he asked, a note of confusion in his voice. "A little late for spring cleaning, isn't it?" Evelyn closed the suitcase with a decisive click. She turned to face him, her calm a stark contrast to his boisterous energy. "I'm leaving you, Blake." He stared at her for a beat, and then he laughed. It was not a kind laugh, it was incredulous and mocking. "You're what? Leaving? Don't be so dramatic, Ev. Was it the joke? It was a joke. It killed. People loved it. It made me seem human." "It made you seem cruel," she said, her voice even. "And it made me see the truth." "The truth?" He scoffed, stepping into the room. "The truth is, you're a senator's wife with a very, very comfortable life. Leaving me for what? To go cry in your kitchen? Where would you even go?" His arrogance was a shield, but she had a weapon he hadn't anticipated. "I'm going to open a restaurant," she said simply. His laughter died in his throat. He looked at her as if she'd just announced she was flying to the moon. "A restaurant? With what money? With what experience? Don't be ridiculous." This was the moment. She looked him square in the eye, savoring the words. "With Oliver Keene's money, he's my partner." Blake's face went through a rapid series of transformations. Disbelief, confusion, and finally, a dark, consuming fury. The charming politician vanished, replaced by the narcissist whose prized possession was defying him. "Keene?" he hissed, the name like poison on his tongue. "You think that old fossil is going to save you? You'll fail in a month, Evelyn. You're nothing without my name, without my connections. You're a hobbyist. An amateur." Every word was designed to cut, to shrink her back down to size, but it had the opposite effect. Every insult was a confirmation. Every sneer was a release. She picked up her suitcase. "That's where you're wrong, Blake," she said, walking toward the door. "I'm not a hobbyist. And I'm about to find out exactly who I am without your name." She walked past him without a backward glance, leaving him standing alone and sputtering in the middle of the room. A king who had just lost control of his kingdom. 3 months later, the political landscape of North Carolina was shaken by an article that had nothing to do with policy and everything to do with taste. It wasn't a leak from a rival or a financial scandal. It was a feature piece by Oliver Keene in the National Herald, syndicated across the country. The title was simple and devastating: A Senator's Bad Taste. The article began not with food, but with a vivid, almost cinematic retelling of Blake Harrington's keynote speech at the governor's gala. It quoted his joke about his wife belonging in the kitchen verbatim. It described the roaring laughter of the powerful and the quiet, dignified exit of the woman he had just sacrificed on the altar of his own ego. Then, Keene pivoted. He dedicated the next 2,000 words to the hidden culinary genius of Evelyn Harrington. He dissected her appetizers with the reverence of an art historian, calling her work a masterclass in flavor, technique, and artistry, utterly wasted on a man who values a punchline over a masterpiece. The story went viral. The hashtag #Harrington's Kitchen began trending. Late-night hosts lampooned Blake. Political pundits, smelling blood in the water, framed it not as a joke, but as a stunning lack of judgment and a glimpse into his true character. His image as a charismatic man of the people was shattered, replaced by that of a petty, misogynistic tyrant. His campaign manager, Seth Adler, could be seen in a brief news clip, his face ashen, dodging reporters' questions about the senator's plummeting poll numbers among female voters. Major donors quietly withdrew their support. Blake Harrington's meteoric rise had ended in a spectacular, self-inflicted crash. He was punished not by a court of law, but by the court of public opinion, his own words serving as the ultimate judgment. On a crisp autumn evening in Raleigh's booming warehouse district, a new light glowed. A simple, elegant sign read, "Harrington's." The name was an act of reclamation, a defiant planting of her flag. The grand opening was an overwhelming success. The room was packed not with politicians and donors, but with food bloggers, artists, and ordinary people who had read her story. The space was the antithesis of her old kitchen. Warm, inviting, with exposed brick, soft lighting, and the happy hum of conversation. At the center of it all was Evelyn. She wasn't in a silk gown. She was in crisp chef's whites, a smudge of flour on her cheek that she wore like a badge of honor. She moved through the kitchen, which was open to the dining room, with an energy that was both calm and electric. She was not a prop or an asset. She was the creator, the maestro, the heart of the entire operation. Oliver Keene stood at the bar, raising a glass of champagne in her direction. She caught his eye and smiled a real brilliant smile. She had turned her deepest humiliation into her greatest triumph. She was no longer just a Harrington. She was Harrington's, and she was finally home.